What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, January 3rd, 2019. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. So let's get right on into it. Obviously, today is the day where the new Congress has convened, and shortly before that happened, late last night, the Senate confirmed dozens of Trump nominees on the final day of the 115th Congress. More than 60 nominations were confirmed by voice vote, so they got those all crammed through. Well, obviously the big news, of course, is that the House of Representatives has been handed over from the Republicans to the Democrats. Nancy Pelosi was elected Speaker of the House. No real surprise there. And they're swearing in the new members, the first-time freshman members of Congress. And Pelosi is already saying she's going to pass a spending bill to end the government shutdown, but it will not include funding for the border wall. And she's doing this as a political stunt. She's doing it so that they can say, oh, Trump is the one who's keeping the government shut down because he won't sign our spending bill. Well, Mitch McConnell has rode on in to take some of the heat off of Donald Trump because Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he will not vote for any House funding bill that does not fund the border wall. So now the fingers are going to be pointing in every single direction. And Pelosi, on the other hand, she's starting to show signs of her age here. And this is an amazing story. This came out of Free Beacon. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi, in an interview with the New York Times, made the claim that the Constitution considers Speaker of the House to be the equal to the President. And in a piece with a headline declaring her an icon of female power, Pelosi was asked if she considers herself Mr. Trump's equal, and she said the Constitution does. Well, Nancy, I hate to be the one to disappoint you, but I have a copy of the Constitution right here, and it says no such thing. You're basically banging the gavel at the House of Representatives. And that's a far, far cry from the authority of the Oval Office. The only way you can be Trump's equal is if somehow Trump and Pence are assassinated at the same time. So unless that's what you have in mind, you're simply getting drunk on your own imagined power. And that's probably going to be dangerous. And of course, the Democrats did not waste any time at all. Day number one, Representative Brad Sherman introduced a resolution to impeach President Donald Trump, accusing him of obstruction of justice over the firing of James Comey. And they really don't have a case because the claim is made that Trump fired Comey in order to head off the FBI investigations into the Russian collusion, except we know now because of Mueller's total failure, there was no Russian collusion. And there were lots of reasons why Comey should be fired, including basically he was guilty of obstruction himself in some of the other investigations going into, well, we've got some details on that a little bit further in the show. But they're basically guessing. But because this is not about what's right and wrong and what the facts are, it is entirely possible that the democratically controlled House will pass a motion of impeachment. Now, Brad Sherman told the Los Angeles Times in an interview, there is no reason Congress shouldn't consider impeachment. Every day, Donald Trump shows that leaving the White House would be good for our country. Well, it would be good for the Democrats. I don't know if it'd be good for the country here. Alan Dershowitz is out there saying that unless there is dramatic new evidence of something that he's done wrong, there will be no impeachment of Donald Trump. Now, here's where it's getting a little bit sticky. We may see a repeat of what happened during the Clinton administration. The House will impeach. The Senate, they don't have the votes to convict and remove. So this is purely symbolic, and it's purely political, and it's grandstanding, and they want to have this to go into 2020 saying, oh, you can't look at re-electing Donald Trump. He got impeached. He got impeached for obstruction of justice, even though they haven't actually proven obstruction of justice. It's guilt by acclamation is basically the way Congress is running right now here. Another little forecast. This is coming out of Sputnik News. House Democrats will expand Russiagate to push Trump toward war. And yes, Democratic Party leaders have promised to press the Russiagate investigation further than the Republicans had before. I mean, I think Robert Mueller pushed it about as hard as anybody could, and they found nothing. One journalist told Sputnik the Democrats' real goal is to try and govern from the Capitol. In other words, they want to be able to usurp or at least override the president's authority. And maybe that's why Nancy Pelosi thinks she's now the equal of the president. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Meanwhile, Tim Canova is out there saying, today we formally call on the U.S. House to not seat Debbie Wasserman Schultz to hear evidence of rigged election and demand a new election. As you probably remember back during the midterms, a lot of election fraud going on, a lot of it connected to Debbie Wasserman Schultz here. Now, getting on back to Comey, it turns out that both Mitt Romney and John McCain were on the FBI radar as part of the funding for Trump dossier. Apparently, they were also tangled up with Fusion GPS, and it had the makings of a promising federal investigation. But then FBI agents were told to stand down and walk away from the evidence. And now we learn through FBI insiders that it was Comey who spiked the FBI probe that uncovered McCain and Romney's ties to Fusion GPS. And apparently FBI agents who were looking into this were told to leave it alone. It was a political case, which I guess is the new term of craft, meaning nobody's going to get arrested, nobody's going to get tried, nobody's going to go to jail. It's political. Okay. Now, as you know, back during Watergate, it was presented to us as the system works. You had Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein and the Washington Post doing their job and, standing for democracy and everything. And lost in all of that is a gentleman by the name of Mark Felt. And he was a major player in Watergate, although most people don't recognize the name. He was the infamous Deep Throat. Now, for you younger listeners, Deep Throat was the name of a very popular porn movie at the time, and he was the deep cover source for Woodward and Bernstein on Watergate. And as it turns out, he was a deputy director of the FBI, and he thought he should be made head of director of the FBI. He was assistant director of the FBI and thought he deserved the directorship. But Richard Nixon chose L. Patrick Gray III, who was a bureaucratic cutout with no ties to the agency. Now, J. Edgar Hoover had been a terror in Washington for generations as head of the FBI, and so Nixon reasoned his replacement had to be someone with no agency connections who would not entertain ideas of becoming the next Hoover. So from Nixon's point of view, that was a good choice. The colorless bureaucrat Gray got the nod, but this obviously angered Mark Felt. And so his going public on Watergate was less about protecting the Republic and more about personal revenge, which seems to be dominating what's going on inside Mueller's investigation, not to mention the new Democratic House of Representatives. It's all petty vindictiveness, and nobody seems to really be giving much thought to how much it could damage the country as a whole. Alrighty, another story, this one coming out of Zero Hedge. As you know, Michael Flynn had to plead guilty to one count of lying to the FBI, and it all comes down to a couple of meetings with a then Russian ambassador. And apparently one of the meetings was on December 29th, 2016, at which point Flynn was part of the incoming administration, and he asked the Russians to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions the U.S. had imposed against Russia. This was followed by another conversation in which Ambassador Kislyak told Flynn that Russia had decided to tone things down and wait for Donald Trump to come into office. Now, there's nothing illegal or collusive or conspiratorial, but apparently Mike Flynn just didn't mention these conversations to the Justice Department or Vice President Mike Pence. This led to his firing and his subsequent pleading guilty in December of last year to lying to the FBI. Could have just been a slip of the memory. But there's no there there. They tried to make a big deal out of it. Oh, we lied about a meeting with the ambassador. They're talking business. They're talking about how best to deal with Russian sanctions. And the Russians agreed with him. Let's tone it down here. So let's talk about Bray Payton. She was a writer for conservative online news magazine The Federalist, guest commentator on the Fox News channel, and she is the journalist who broke the story that Robert Mueller had deleted all the text messages off of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's cell phones before the Inspector General could look at them. And she passed away. Very young lady, something like mid-20s. And the official story is that she died of meningitis. But people who were with her said that as early as 2 days before her body was discovered, she looked fine. No complaints. She was just going great. So the dead bodies do keep piling on up. And we have seen a lot of journalists like Michael Hastings who meet untimely ends as the deep state continues to panic. Out in California, there was a story that ran in the Los Angeles Times yesterday. It was supposed to be one of those tug on the heartstrings, tear-jerking, carefully curated narratives about the dreamers that we're supposed to read and respond to with sympathy. But the gist of the article was about how the dreamers worked hard to go on out and get out the vote for the Democrats. And it's actually, this article is raising questions about just how far out of control ballot harvesting in California went. Now, in most states, ballot harvesting is illegal, but it was legalized in California. And basically, the ballot harvesters who succeeded in flipping places like Orange County blue, and Orange County's been Republican for as long as I can remember. And they did it by, quote, unquote, helping fill out, turn in, and continue to turn in ballots from otherwise uncommitted voters, people who might not have even voted at all. They just went on out and said, we'll take care of it for you, until they got the result they wanted. And these dreamers, of course, are not actually U.S. citizens. These are the dreamers, the illegal immigrants voting in the political party that's going to take the United States of America away from you, the legal American citizens, and give it to the illegals as long as they continue to vote Democratic. We're in the real bread and circuses phase here. Now, there's a little bit of a victory because Judicial Watch has reached a settlement with the state of California and the county of Los Angeles, under which they'll begin the process of removing 1.5 million inactive registered names that may be invalid. Now, these removals are required by the National Voter Registration Act, but efforts to get those polls clean before the midterms were stonewalled. And of course, that makes these registrations available for fake ballots, voter fraud. Now, Los Angeles County has over 10 million residents. That one county has more people than the populations of 41 of the 50 states. I don't understand why Trump isn't working to clean up the selection system. He's got to know they're going to use it against him in 2020, if he even lasts that long. I mean, the Democrats are out there, they're loaded for bear here. As you know, going into the new year, the social media platforms have taken on a new role of arbiter of content, of what Americans can see, hear, and read. They're even starting to take on the role overseer. There's a story we just put up at whatreallyhappened.com where Facebook is now in the habit of, if it thinks somebody's Facebook post indicates a bad mental state, they'll report you to the police as a potential suicide, at which the police will come on over and grab you and throw you in a mental hospital for a mental health evaluation. And of course, these days, with the state of that diagnostic manual, pretty much everything can be declared a mental illness, at which point you can lose your guns, you can even lose your freedom. They even have a name, a mental illness for people who want to eat healthy food. It's called orthorexia nervosa. Ooh, you want healthy foods? You don't want, fast food burgers? Yo, you're mentally ill, definitely here. So we're seeing all this massive deplatforming. The original spirit of the free and open internet seems to be pretty much gone, unless you're setting up your own VPN for you and your friends. And what they're doing to the internet is what they did to the corporate media. Instead of dozens and dozens of individual sources of news and commentary and analysis, they want to just distill it down to the big three that can be brought under government control here. Now, over at CNN, there is this reporter, Oliver Darcy, and he was a major player in getting Alex Jones deplatformed from the internet's major social networks. So much for the idea of a free press. Now he's on another crusade. Now he is pushing to censor President Donald J. Trump's new press conferences. And he's out there saying, well, we shouldn't carry those things live anymore. We should just record them. And then we, the corporate media, will vet them for accuracy and content, and only then rebroadcast them to the American people. So that's the next step. The corporate media want to just be in control of what you hear from the president, which is why he spends so much time on Twitter. Now, as long as we're talking about the corporate media, a couple of embarrassments out there we need to look at. 5 weeks ago, The Guardian came out with this blockbuster story that Manafort had met with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And they didn't have anything to support it, but they kept on putting it out there. Assange denied it. The Ecuadorian embassy denied it. Manafort's travel documents don't support that he was ever there. But they still kept on pushing this. And The Guardian, of course, is probably destroying its own credibility because they didn't do the due diligence. They didn't go and check to see if the story was real. They just went with it. Now, that Ecuadorian embassy is one of the most surveilled, videoed, photographed buildings on the planet. They're claiming that Manafort got in and out of there 3 separate occasions without any smoking gun evidence emerged. That's what The Guardian is trying to claim here. So you have to ask the question, why would The Guardian publish a story of this magnitude without first requiring that the Ecuadorian intelligence sources provide them with some photos or video evidence to support their allegations? But they didn't. And back over at Der Spiegel, where they just fired one of their star reporters for faking stories over years, has now fired 2 senior editors. So apparently that is just unraveling. I mean, the corporate media, its masters are the corporations and the governments. And that's why they hate the independent media. We won't do what we're told. That's why they're coming after us here. Apparently, a new study is showing that all of the corporate media were wrong about Russian social media involvement in U.S. politics. It was small, amateurish, and most of it was not even related to the 2016 election. Okay, so we're coming up here on a commercial break, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the media, and interestingly enough, former New York Times editor Jill Abramson, who was the paper's first female executive editor, is out there now saying that the New York Times has lost its credibility because of their anti-Trump bias. And so we have a lot of these people who are coming on out and saying, well, I used to be part of this, I'm not anymore. And I got to tell you, it's pretty bad here. And over at NBC, William M. Arkin, this is an award-winning journalist. He's been with NBC for 30 years. And he just resigned, citing as his reason NBC's support for endless wars, basically saying that ostensibly liberal mass media outlets have just become totally resistant to anti-war narratives, skepticism of the U.S. military agendas, and any movement in the opposite direction of endless military expansionism and endless war. I remember when I was a kid, it was the Republicans who were the war hawks. Well, we're going to have a war. And the Democrats ran on a platform of peace, but no more. So apparently tomorrow is his last day. All right, let's take a phone call here from Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Interesting about the New York Times is that their stock has tripled since Trump's been in. So the problem with them trying to correct their error and trying to be more open-minded and give the fair play, they're catering to an audience now. And their lefty audience might not allow them to give fair play anymore. So they've kind of stepped in it in that by becoming such a voice for the lefties that now they're going to have a hard time getting back because they do have their audience has gotten larger, but it's caused the paper to no longer be balanced. And it's a sad situation as far as their journalism is concerned, but the bottom line is actually improved for the company. So that's just an interesting part of that. Now, as an amateur political analyst, I think that the Democrats taking the House is actually a good thing for Trump. It sets him up well for 2020. I mean, he just had a bunch of rhinos in the Republican Party anyway, and he got what he needed out of them rhinos. He got his tax cut. Now he's going to have a Democrat House, so he'll get the NAFTA deal through. And personally, I think he's going to love all this impeachment story because he's just sitting there waiting to release the FISA. He's letting them use all their ammunition. And as soon as Mueller comes out with his report, he's going to release all this FISA information. The word is that he can't release these FISA because he's worried Mueller will use it as a way to accuse him of trying to interfere with his investigation. So he's sitting on a ton of dynamite that's going to tear these investigations down. Flynn, the whole thing is going to just fall right apart. And he's just sitting back. I tell you, the guy sits back and he's got a handful of cards. He's sitting on a royal flush, I think, and just a good war tactic. He's letting the enemy go further and further into his clutches and run out of ammunition. And the minute they put that Mueller report comes out, he's going to tear it apart. I mean, from what I know, just from reading the papers and stuff and following it through internet and everything, is the whole thing is a joke. It's a huge fraud, and there's so many crimes that Mueller has committed that it's gonna be hysterical. So Trump's got the Senate to get his Supreme Court judges through, and he's got a lefty Democrat. And meanwhile, if he wins in 2020, he's going to get a real Republicans without the rhinos to have a House to really run some stuff through. So, this whole thing about Trump, they try to paint him on TV like he's been beaten and he's weak. I think he's sitting on I would love to be in his place politically.
Well, there's a possibility that this move to impeach is going to backflash on the Democrats because they've got nothing to back it up. And again, they cannot get it through the Senate. But I think the Democrats are, by behaving the way that they are, they're destroying their own brand. The American people are watching all of this behavior. And they're watching Nancy Pelosi out there saying she's the equal of the president under the Constitution. They're out there seeing this representative for day one motion to impeach, and they're seeing how childish it all is. And I think that by the time 2020 gets around here, we're going to see that America's heartland are going to be pretty much fed up with political correctness and liberalism in general. The wild card, of course, is massive election fraud and illegal immigrant voting. And if Trump does not take those on, he is a one-term president.
Well, I watch him, and you got to really with Trump, especially with the media echo chamber calling it chaos and everything, all the moves he makes are very calculated. I mean, getting rid of Mattis is not something you do with a weak hand. That's just the things that he does. And now he's painting the Democrats in on this whole border wall thing. They're going to cave. If I was him, I'd ask for $8 billion now because he let them go into this. He wanted this fight, and he's going to hold to their guns. I saw some very hysterical Democrats today on TV talking about the shutdown. And they are
okay.
the party.
I'm going to have to let you go. I'm sorry, we're at another commercial break. I'm going to have to let you go. I don't think the Democrats are going to cave. I think this has become their standard, and they're betting the farm on all of this. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show there. A little bit of a drop out there. Donald Trump is having his first press conference of the new year, and the theme of it is definitely the border security, and he's got a whole bunch of officials from Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol. They're all up there saying that they support President Trump and what he's got to do. And I think the best quote came from this last guy saying, it really comes down to this. It's got nothing to do with political parties. If I come to your home, would you rather I knock on your door or simply climb in through a window? And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful metaphor for what's going on here. We're going to talk more about that immigration issue in a little bit. But first, we're going to take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
The easiest way, Mike, if people are against the border wall, you just ask them, well, do you lock your doors in your home or your car?
Yep.
When you go to work, 99% of Americans lock their car, right?
Yep.
Or their home. If they go to work, they lock their home. Well, if you lock your home, then why can't you lock your wall up there? That's your first line of defense, right?
That is the first line of defense. And of course, the liberals and open border people are out there saying that, walls don't work. These officials that Trump has up at the podium are saying, yes, they've been with the Border Patrol for decades, and they know that walls do work. And apparently there was a wall down there in Arizona, but it's simply been allowed to decay away to uselessness. Certainly the wall around the Vatican is very effective. The walls around the homes in which Nancy Pelosi currently lives, they're very tall, they're very sturdy. We know that the wall that Israel built around Palestine, that one works as well. So why should our wall not be just as effective?
And their secret servers are probably tall and sturdy too, because that's their second line of defense. We don't average Americans have any of that. People need to keep that in mind. They got walls plus security.
Yep.
We have Zippo. We have like a thin aluminum door probably, But Mike, I want to talk about Trump. Your previous caller, he's right saying certain things, but if Trump's holding all these cars, you use them or you're going to lose them.
I agree.
We're in 2019 already, Mike.
Yep.
It's January 3rd. Why does he still have Bolton and Pompeo there? That's what I want to know.
He's still getting bad advice. He's listening to the wrong people. And, of course, every time he moves to try and change the White House staffing, the corporate media says, oh, they're in chaos over there. And, Trump is a wild man. He's not listening to those wonderful advisors that we all think he should be listening to. And, of course, those advisors are all pro-war and, pro-big business and pro-open borders and pro-New World Order.
Hey, did you notice that Rear Admiral Kirby is on CNN as an analyst? That was during the Obama administration, and then also John Brennan's on MSNBC. So it's just the merging of the media with the deep state, basically, the establishment.
Government media.
That's pretty sad. Yeah, and but I like I said, I back to Trump. I think if he's got to do something, the longer he waits is a mistake.
Yes,
if you're going to do something, you got to do it now, man.
I agree.
You got to know
when he got rid of Mattis and he started talking about pulling out of Syria, I thought maybe he'd finally found those presidential brass knuckles, but now I'm not so sure.
Well, why might you if you move forward on these people, you move forward. if you stop or take a break, you're going to be taking 10 steps back.
Yes.
And you'll never be able to recover or catch your breath. So he needs to move forward, with whatever agenda he has. But I still think he's got to get rid of Bolton and Pompeo. And, I think the Pentagon itself, he's got to, if he wants to put somebody in, they got to be like of a rank and file, not a political general. You know what I mean? Like, they said the first 100 generals should be like just fired or given their pensions and go away. He needs to get somebody who's not in that group.
Not tangled up in the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
And, it really is a mess. But I don't know what Trump can do. Now that it's 2019 and the House is now in Democratic hands, they're going to do everything they can to waste his time and tangle him up. That's why they're filing this impeachment resolution against him. Knowing the Senate will not convict and will not remove him, they're still moving ahead with that. There are already 17 investigations into Donald Trump and his family and his organizations. And Pelosi is out there saying, we're going to be doing a lot more. She's already hiring a phalanx of lawyers to just go find something, anything, just go after this guy.
Yeah, but Mike, he has the opportunity to pull a lot of the troops home from the Middle East and in Europe. He has that ability. He's the commander-in-chief. They don't have that. He can do that and set these people back a big amount of time. That'll take them so long to recover. That's why I think he should go to scorched earth policy at this point, to this 2019.
Well, I think at the point where Donald Trump realizes he's not going to have a chance in 2020, we may see him toughen up a little bit. But again, my sense of it is that he is proving to be a weak leader, that he's easy to manipulate by people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and Lindsey Graham and the rest of it. I'm sorry to see it happen, but like I said, the Democratic House, they're going to spend most of their time finding out ways to go after Donald Trump. To heck with the American people and the American nation. I'm sure they'll be out there, again, continuing to push for open borders and amnesty for the illegal immigrants, because that has now become their voter base.
It's just odd because everything he ran on, like NATO being like a waste of money and, and all these Middle East wars, he was right on, at that point. But when he got in, but he still has that ability. He's the commander. He's the commander-in-chief. He has the ability to pull troops out whenever and wherever he wants. And he has that ability until he's not the president anymore. That's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Bill in Wisconsin. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, aloha and Happy New Year. Okay,
aloha and Happy New Year.
What's on my mind is I agree with most of what Dustin just said about Commander-in-Chief. He had said he's going to pull the troops out of Syria. Okay, now he's backing off of that a little bit. Okay, when he appeared before the troops in Iraq, he said, "You're going to be proud of us. We're going to use all of our weaponry and so forth, and we're going to win this thing." And, Iraq was a big mistake. He admitted that, and now he's going to compound it. It doesn't make any sense. And then I would say to Joe that his whole idea of pulling out of NAFTA is not on the up and up. In other words, that's what we all wanted, get rid of NAFTA. But
yes,
in essence, he's still got deep state guys like Lighthouser and others from the Council on Foreign Relations. It's still intact, the idea of a North American Union, and therefore there isn't that much of a change. He didn't get rid of NAFTA. He just put it under the kind of ideas of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I'm familiar with it, but supposedly we pulled out of the TPP. And again, that's what led to the tariff war.
Yeah, but every analysis that I've seen from the deep state guys is basically stating that's what he actually has done here. It's the ideas of the TPP on this so-called change with NAFTA. So it's cosmetic. Now, the day that he gets rid of his son-in-law telling him what to do, the day that he's fair and decent to the people of Palestine, then I'll say, okay, we've got some change that we can support. But right now, I'm withholding my support.
Well, we're all running around here saying Happy New Year to each other, but frankly, so far it feels a lot like the old one.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was sarcasm.
Oh, okay.
That was my sarcasm.
Okay, well, Bill, anything else?
No, that's it for today. I like your show. Listen almost every day.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We're going to let
All
you
right.
go here and switch over to Mark in Florida. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for letting me in, and Happy New Year. And I just wanted to, I'm opposed to the wall. I think it's medieval, ridiculous, and childish. But to make my point, I would say, would a wall have secured Hillary's server in her basement? Would a wall have prevented Iran-Contra? Would a
Well,
wall
Mark, let me ask you a question.
The United States have done?
Mark, let me ask you a question. Absent a wall, how are you going to stop the flood of illegal immigrants coming over our southern border?
Well, in my opinion, the illegal immigrants are not a problem. Our problem is our criminal government. Until we get rid of our criminal government, the immigrants are nothing.
Well, I think you're going to find immigrants are a problem. They're burdening our social services and our already stressed economy. They're crowding on in. They're coming on in with these highly contagious diseases. They're bringing drugs and crime with them. MS-13 gang. So don't tell me you don't think Trump's solution of a wall is a bad idea until you have a better idea to stop the problem, because there is a problem.
That's all. Well, Mike, I would say that's all propaganda to scare the ignorant masses of Americans, whatever that means.
Okay, so now you're calling me ignorant?
Government, the masses of Americans. If you want to join them, go ahead. What I'm trying to say is, it's a ploy to get the people to accept more jackboot American conditions.
The only jackboot American conditions are if you're trying to step across that border illegally. Now, I would actually agree with you on one point. I think we could go without the wall as long as somebody was enforcing Title VIII. And you go on out there and you start arresting and jailing everybody in this country who aids and abets the illegal immigrants, gives them employment, gives them shelter, gives them transportation, gives them food, because all of those are illegal under Title VIII. If you stop giving the illegal immigrants free stuff, they're going to stop coming here. And that's why they're coming here. They're lured by the promise that if they get across that border and they vote Democrat, that they won't have to do anything for the rest of their lives. They'll just get all kinds of free handouts.
But where it's hurt me, Mike, is I used to be able to go to a man and say, can I have a job? And he'd try me out and see if it worked. Now I got to fill out 10 government forms proving I've had the privilege of being an American and the privilege of having a job. And I'm sick and tired of being a slave, Mike.
Well, I had to go through that the last time that I taught at UH Manoa. I had to show them my Social Security card, my birth certificate, and all the rest of it. And I find it very angering, too. But the reason we're having to do that is because of the failure to control our borders. If we didn't have a flood of illegal immigrants coming into this country and taking jobs, there wouldn't be a need for American citizens to prove their citizenship. If the borders had stayed closed from Eisenhower's time to today, neither of us would have to go through that. Anyway, Mark, thank you for your insights. We're going to let you go.
It's proven our slavery, Mike. Thank you.
All right. Well, but again, the immigration is a problem, and trying to pretend that it isn't going to make it go away. And again, back to that quote from that one border control official there. When I'm coming over to your house, do you want me to knock on your door, or do you want me to just crawl in through the window? And that really is what it comes down to. Now, getting on back to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she has been running on her sort of racial roots, if you will. And she got into a little trouble when she tweeted out a photo of her new congressional office on Capitol Hill, where she captioned it, don't be fooled by the office I've got. I'm still Alexandria from the Bronx. Well, it turns out she's not from the Bronx. She never was. She grew up and attended school in Westchester, New York, which is a very wealthy area. And somebody found her yearbook and discovered that she used to go by the name Sandy. So she's just she's a fake. And she's trying to pander to the voters by saying, oh yeah, I'm just like you. I'm just like you. Alrighty. Now, Nancy Pelosi, as you knew, came under a serious amount of criticism because she came out here to Hawaii for a vacation over the holidays while Donald Trump stayed in Washington, D.C., trying to find a solution to the shutdown and the wall problem. Maxine Waters did the same thing. She took off. And Pelosi went down here to the Big Island to this luxury resort where, I mean, the high-end rooms go for like thousands per day. And she's now out there saying, well, you know, it was time for my vacation and it was okay because I only went half as long as I normally would have. So that's her excuse for just skedaddling out of town and not staying to work with Donald Trump because she doesn't want to work with Donald Trump. I mean, look at that arrogant statement she made in that interview where she sees herself now as Trump's equal. She doesn't want to compromise. She's taking this attitude, it's her way or the highway. So this is going to come down to being a contest of wills. Now, as you know, Donald Trump had a press conference yesterday, and he made a lot of comments talking about what's going on in Syria and Afghanistan, and it's already drawing a lot of criticisms here. Donald Trump defended his decision to start withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria, saying the country was nothing but sand and death. Well, there's a little oil in there as well. And he came on out and admitted Syria was lost long ago. It was lost long ago. We're not talking about vast wealth. We're talking about sand and death. I'm getting out. We're getting out of Syria. Look, we don't want Syria. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the response to Donald Trump's press conference yesterday. We were talking about Syria and Afghanistan, and basically Trump was talking about the Syria withdrawal, and he's saying he never said how fast or slow it was going to be, but it will happen over a period of time. And yet, unfortunately, we hear that the U.S. is already building a couple of new military bases down by the Iraq border, and more hardware is being sent in. So, is Trump really sincere and he's being defied by his own chain of command? Or has he been smoking opium? Turning to Afghanistan, Trump was saying the reason he wanted to pull half of our troops out of there is because the Afghan invasion bankrupted the Soviet Union. And of course, the corporate media came on out and said, no, it had nothing to do with it. Now, the Soviets literally did not declare bankruptcy, but their defeat in Afghanistan was the beginning of the end of their attempts to project power abroad. It was the downfall of the Soviet military, which prior to that point had a reputation of invincibility. And the fact that they got kicked out of Afghanistan by a bunch of camel herders, albeit with the covert support of the CIA, was a major blow. And what really bankrupted the Soviet Union was trying to stay up with U.S. military spending, in particular Star Wars. So now the situation is reversed. The United States is bankrupting itself, trying to catch up with Russia and China. All right. Speaking of Syria, apparently there's a report that Israel's new army chief, Aviv Kashavi, had a plan to assassinate Syria's President Assad. But Israel's government said, no, he could not do that. So it does look like they were seriously discussing the possibility here. All right, so what's really going on in Syria, and why might there be a pushback against a troop withdrawal? Well, because war is good for business, and in the case of Afghanistan, it is good for organized crime. Because right now it is estimated the global heroin market is more than 500 billion with a B dollars. And basically opium production in Afghanistan is up 9,000 metric tons, or 900,000 kilograms of pure heroin. Now, the heroin trade is colossal. 1 gram of pure heroin selling at $902 per gram is almost $1 million a kilo. So there are the players who want us to stay in Afghanistan. Certainly the people who have that access to that low-cost pipeline want us to stay there. The war machine wants to go on having an excuse to spend money on more weapons. But behind that, you have the global drug lords. And what part of the U.S. government has been caught engaging in the global drug trade in the past? I'll give you a hint. Their initials stand for the Cocaine Importation Agency. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Over in Yemen, there are accusations flying, coming from the United Nations, that the U.S.-backed Saudi allies are basically seizing the humanitarian aid destined for the starving civilians. And one UN official said, if there is no corruption, there is no famine. So, once again, they're having trouble getting the aid to the people who really, really need it here. Over in Russia, retired U.S. Marine Paul Whelan has been detained by the Russian Secret Services, and he was caught in the possession of an electronic database with a list of secret employees of a Russian agency. Now, the 48-year-old had fallen under suspicion on frequent visits to Russia because while he went there saying he was going to have fun, he tended to avoid the pretty women and instead spent all of his time making contacts with people who might have access to confidential information. So minutes after receiving a flash drive in his 5-star hotel room in Moscow, maybe it was the one Trump used, armed FSB operatives basically arrested him. And so he's in trouble here. He's under suspicion of espionage. Now, the United States has immediately demanded access to Paul Whelan. Mike Pompeo got on his high dudgeon and said, if the detention is not appropriate, we will demand his immediate return. So Pompeo was out there saying the U.S. is hopeful within the next hours we'll get consular access to see him and get a chance to learn more. And I am absolutely certain Russia will allow consular access to Whelan just as soon as Russia is allowed consular access to the Skripals. Nobody knows where they are except that they're still alive, which is amazing considering that the poison we were told they were exposed to, Novichok, is the deadliest nerve agent in the world. Over in Israel, they're getting close to completing its controversial seawall, which runs alongside the Gaza Strip to completion. Now, the project is under international condemnation and scrutiny, and since it began in May of last year, at which point Israeli officials announced the sea barrier separating Gazan and Israeli sections of water is necessary to prevent Hamas fighters from infiltrating Israel by sea. But basically, Israel's going for a total air, sea, and land blockade. And this sea barrier is not going to prevent anybody from infiltrating Israel because they just swim a little bit further out, come on back in. Now, as you know, we had this meeting between Mike Pompeo and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And apparently, since the meeting was over, Netanyahu was basically bragging that he got almost everything he wanted in his meeting with Mike Pompeo. Oh, yes, we got pretty much everything we wanted. Now, I don't like Mike Pompeo, but I'm not pleased to see him grovel before Benjamin Netanyahu. There's a lot of talk, though, that Netanyahu is facing some serious challenges in the upcoming early elections, and that he may finally be dethroned as the king of Israel. We were talking a little while ago about this deal where Israel wanted to sell some of their used F-16s they got from the United States to Croatia. Croatia wants to buy them from Israel to replace its Russian-made MiG-21s. The deal is worth $500,000, and it's the Balkan nation's biggest arms purchase since leaving the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s war. But Washington objected to the sale of these U.S.-made jets because it wants the removal of electronic system upgrades that Israel added. Now, when the United States sold these F-16s to Israel, there was a contract that said, yes, when they get old and you don't want them anymore, you may resell them, but they have to be in the original condition. And it's reached the point now where the Croatian defense minister is saying that unless there is an official response by January 11th on whether Israel can deliver the aircraft or not, they're going to cancel the deal. They're just going to pull out of the deal, and Israel will scream and cry and say it's all Donald Trump's fault here. A monitoring group in Israel, Peace Now, has showed something which is not going to come as a surprise. Israeli illegal settlement activity surged in the Trump era, and Israel has launched a new settlement push in the West Bank since Trump took office, laying the groundwork for what could be the largest construction binge in years. And basically, last week you had an Israeli committee advance plans for thousands more settlement homes on occupied lands. And that's only deepened Palestinian mistrust of the Trump administration. Now, the Trump administration is getting ready to roll out what they think is their peace plan for the Mideast, the deal of the century. And so far, it looks very, very one-sided. So Trump's approach may be, we're just going to starve you all to death, and when you're hungry enough, you'll sign our agreement. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Looking back over the year 2018, the Palestine Liberation Organization's Abdullah Hourani Center for Studies and Documentation basically tallied up and said Israeli army forces killed 312 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip last year. And basically the number of Palestinians being killed has increased by 200% compared to the previous year, adding that 31,000 Palestinians were injured in the Gaza Strip and 500 others in the West Bank by Israeli army fire. Over in Bethlehem, and this happened just yesterday, Israeli forces raided a Palestinian school, firing rubber bullets, tear gas, and stun grenades. And apparently several Palestinian students suffered temporary asphyxiation from the tear gas, were treated on the spot. Now, there's no official reason why Israeli forces raided the school, but the Israeli military usually says, oh, the Palestinian students were throwing stones on settlers' cars passing nearby. It's a handy little excuse. Over in France, one of the leaders of France's Yellow Vest movement was arrested in Paris late yesterday after authorities charged him with organizing and leading an unauthorized protest. It's hard to imagine the government of Macron authorizing a protest that's calling for his own resignation. But Eric Drouet was detained by police as some of the movement's supporters gathered in the Place de la Concorde near the Arc de Triomphe monument. And people apparently left candles in remembrance of the movement's wounded in clashes with the police. This is why you should never have a led movement. The leaders become targets. Leaderless resistance is really most effective. And over in Germany, one of their leaders Sarah Wagenknecht, founder of the Get Up group, is saying they will take to the streets next year in a parallel of the Yellow Vest protests. So everybody's getting fed up. Everybody's getting ready to protest all over. Story out of Zero Hedge here, talking about things are very active in the Eastern Mediterranean. A lot of focus on those pipelines, or the pipeline wars. Cyprus and Greece are pushing forward to complete the East Med pipeline, a new gas conduit designed to diversify Europe's natural gas sources and find a long-term reliable market outlet for all the recent Mediterranean gas discoveries. The three sides have reached an agreement in late November, apparently Israel's part of this as well, to lay the pipeline, the estimated cost of which will be about $7 billion, roughly the same as the rival Turkstream's construction cost. Yet behind the facade, it's still very early to talk about EastMed as a viable and profitable project, as it faces an uphill battle with traditionally difficult Levantine geopolitics, as well as the geology of where they want to lay the pipeline. So there's some engineering problems to solve. Now, the geostrategic impact of all of this is that the world's pipelines are key pieces in global politics. If you control those pipelines, you control vast sectors of the world economy. You can even control what currency that oil will be sold for. And the United States is looking for some way to get them to go back on, to force them to use the dollar, to take control of the pipelines and say, if you want the oil, it'll be sold only for the dollar. That was the whole reason for the petrodollar deal. After Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility for the Federal Reserve note, people started turning away from the dollar. They went to all those oil nations in the Middle East and they said, look, we'll make you a deal. Sell your oil only for the U.S. dollar, invest a certain portion of that money in the U.S. economy, and we in exchange will protect you militarily from all of your neighbors. Sounded like a good deal at the time. And that's where the petrodollar came from. And it did keep world demand for the U.S. dollar high. But ever since 9/11, when the United States seems no longer able to stand up to Israel, who is the primary aggressor threat against the oil nations of the Middle East, some of these countries have decided the petrodollar deal is dead. That's what happened in 2002 when Saddam Hussein got UN permission to sell Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. 1 year later, screaming nuclear weapons, the U.S. invades. They lynch Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil was put back on the market for the U.S. dollar. Over in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi got rid of their private central bank, set up a state central bank, a new currency, the gold dinar, and announced to the world that Libya's oil was for sale not for the U.S. dollar, but for the gold dinar. So the U.S. goes on in, stages a color revolution, they kill Gaddafi, they shut down the state central bank, put in a brand new private central bank, the gold for the gold dinar, nobody knows where that really went, and Libya's oil is back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. You can see how important this stuff is, where they're literally willing to go to war over oil pipeline rights of way. That's why they went into Afghanistan, for an oil and gas pipeline right of way. That's one of the reasons they're in Syria, because Syria did not want to allow Israel to build that oil and gas pipeline along their coast, because Syria understood Israel would be using it to take oil and gas from underneath the Golan, which Syria still considers its territory, to sell to Europe. Can't underestimate those oil pipelines. Okay, now Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan, only 2 days on the job, and he's already out there telling military leaders, we've got to focus on the ongoing operations, but remember, China, China, China. It's all about China. So I thought, Russia were the bad guy. You can't seriously be thinking about taking them both on at the same time here. Meanwhile, the U.S. has issued a China travel advisory, warning of what they describe as arbitrary enforcement of local laws. And this has to do with the tit-for-tat that's going on following the arrest of the Huawei CFO up in Canada for extradition to the United States. supposedly for violating Iran sanctions. And Chinese authorities have in turn arrested some Chinese citizens. Supposedly one of them was helping to violate sanctions on North Korea. The other one they haven't said. But the U.S. is now out there saying, you don't want to go to China, which is a shame. Oh, yeah. Just got a comment from the talking about walls that work. The Berlin Wall. I don't think more than a handful of people ever got across that one in all of its years of existence. Yesterday, Beijing came on out with this announcement. Xi Jinping said, it basically threatened violence against Taiwan should it pursue de jure independence from China, and declared his intentions to push for a one-country, two-systems arrangement for what China considers to be a rogue province. Now, pro-independence Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen clapped back at Xi, saying that reunification will never happen. Taiwan will never accept reunification with Beijing. Now, that issue has been ticking along for a very, very, very long time, and I hope it doesn't explode up now. But if there is a war in the South China Sea, I think that you might see China go into Taiwan, if for no other reason than to deny Taiwanese bases to the invaders. Apparently, North Korea's acting ambassador to Italy has now gone into hiding with his wife. The South Korea spy agency told lawmakers in Seoul on Thursday. This actually happened last November, but it's a high-profile defection by one of North Korea's elite. It's seen as a huge embarrassment for Kim Jong-un. Now, at some point, I am predicting this defector will be offered huge amounts of money and a trip to Disneyland to make false claims about Kim Jong-un, to try and get the war wagon back on its wheels, because we've seen that happen before. Oh, we have a defector. We can count on them to tell the truth. And then, of course, we're peddled a whole bunch of lies that benefit the war machine here. Now, here's an interesting little story. Donald Trump has slammed the Pentagon's Inspector General for releasing reports about Iraq and Afghanistan to the public. Trump wants less transparency from one of the country's least transparent agencies. And Trump told Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan he wanted to stop releasing the watchdog reports to the public, calling the practice insane, which tells us we're not doing very well in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're doing things in these countries we ought not to be doing, and Trump doesn't want you to know about it anymore. So, apparently, military around the world are having trouble recruiting, mostly because everybody looks up and they see wars everywhere and figure there's a good chance they're going to wind up with a rifle in their hand. And that's kind of a depressing prospect here. So apparently, over in Great Britain, where they're continuing to fail to reach their recruitment targets, they're changing their approach. They want to start targeting young people, and they're using social media to target stressed and vulnerable 16-year-olds facing exam results with a campaign that says the Army is open to enlist those who don't get good school results. Gamers, snowflakes, selfie addicts, you're all welcome to come on in here. Over here in the United States of America, up in Seattle, they're getting so desperate to recruit people, they're starting to turn toward liberal-leaning cities. And the recruiters are not doing very well. Now, the recruiters get a Friday off for each soldier they enlist. But so far, they've been at this for about 3 weeks now, and the current tally, 2 recruits. That's it for the entire recruiting station, 2 recruits. So all of these liberals who are out there screaming, yes, support the war agenda, not going to catch them with a rifle in their hand. No, that's what you conservatives are for. You know, we're going to send you out to do the fighting here. Over in Russia, they are going to expand their arsenal of Iskander-M nuclear-capable missiles this year, one of the nearly 200 new weapons that Moscow continues to develop under its new state armament program. And apparently this missile can fly about 500 kilometers. It's precision guided. It can be used against multiple launch rocket systems, long-range artillery guns, command posts, and communication centers. I don't imagine you need a nuclear warhead for those. But apparently this missile is maneuverable at extreme speeds and can even release its own decoys. That is going to make it very, very hard to kill. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and that's a very appropriate bumper because we're going to be talking about the economy for the next couple of segments of the show here. And as you're probably already aware, was a huge downturn on the stock market. The Dow closed 660 down, and apparently was all triggered by Apple Computer saying that their sales weren't what they expected to be. So here's what I'm wondering. Is our economy, is our stock market so fragile that one company missing their earnings sends everybody into a panic? Because that's what it felt like to me, the beginnings of a panic. One bad earning report from Apple just shook up the entire system. Now, it was a bad report. It was a bad report. Apple lost $55 billion in value. They had to slash their revenue predictions. Tim Cook is blaming China for this, while admitting there were fewer iPhone upgrades than expected globally. Apparently, Tim Cook couldn't understand why people didn't want to pay that eye-watering $1,100 for a brand new phone. But it was a bit of a disaster, and a lot of people saying it's a slowdown. Now, this other article, this is out of Finance and Yahoo, is attempting to put the blame on Donald Trump, that it's the trade war that is slowing down the global economy. And to an extent, they're correct. But again, like so many other things, there's no one cause as to what's going on. Apple erred in coming out with a hideously expensive iPhone that wasn't significantly superior to previous models. The tariffs didn't help. Driving down wages and salaries didn't help. It's a confluence of all sorts of bad decisions made by the money junkies and the politicians over the last couple of decades here. And so we're in a situation right now, people are talking about a crash, chaos. Goldman is already out there saying that Apple will have to cut their 2019 numbers even further, and they're now comparing Apple to Nokia. And that is a bad thing. So let's talk about the economy and disparity of income. Things are getting very, very out of balance everywhere. And there's a new term out there called Seattleization. And a lot of people were worried that Seattle could become the next San Francisco. Well, it turns out now other cities are worrying about becoming the next Seattle because it's high housing costs, the tech wealth is driving up prices everywhere, and it's just completely changed the city. Even in New York City, they're very worried that the planned Amazon campus would turn that area into Seattle on steroids, where there's a very, very wealthy elite and everybody else just struggling to get on by. And they're saying it's stunning how expensive Seattle became and how quickly it happened. All righty. Now, Market yesterday, that's M-A-R-K-I-T, reported that the U.S. manufacturing PMI tumbled to a 15-month low. And basically, the manufacturing ISM has crashed the most since the financial crisis of 2008. In other words, for all the talk about, oh yeah, things are good, things are good, things are good. No, the manufacturing is down. And we're seeing this in reports about raw materials deliveries, the Baltic Dry Index. We're seeing the fact that a lot of shipping companies are now scrapping more and more of their older ships. They don't need them anymore. And right now in this article, this came out of Zero Hedge, the construction industry layoffs surged the most on record. So new property construction has also ground to a halt. This is not a healthy economy. This is a dead man walking. He's just looking for a place to fall down. Now, so far, the Dow futures for tomorrow are up 35, but of course that could change as the day wears on in the pre-market trading here. Ford was very, very concerned. Their sales data showed sales plunging 9% just in December. But Ford has come up with a solution for that. They're going to stop reporting monthly sales data. That ought to make everything just all better here. Now, because of this disparity in cost of living, people are starting to move. They're starting to relocate. And one of the places they're going to is Vermont, which is a beautiful state. It's right next door to New Hampshire, which is where I grew up, and I've been to Vermont many times. Get maple syrup, go skiing. It's a beautiful, beautiful state. A lot of freedom there. Very little gun control, and very rural. And right now, Vermont has a higher proportion of people moving there from out of state than anywhere else in the United States. Vermont has the second smallest state population, second only to Wyoming. But people are starting to move on in. And boy, if we could get the money, I'd be one of them. We're going to take a break for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones here to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, I just want to say, one bad apple can ruin the barrel. And the smoke is gone. The smoke is gone, and the mirrors are broken. So what the hell do we do?
Well, again, what we've been saying over the last couple of years is everybody has to be getting ready to take care of themselves when everything breaks down around them. You know, storable food, storable water, extra of your prescription medication if it's that critical, because we could see the supply chain start to break if there's a major economic crash. And there are, unfortunately, an alarming number of experts out there saying that the coming crash could be even worse than the one of the 1930s, and we all sort of understand how bad that was.
Right. In fact, you and I talked about this maybe about a month ago. We stated that January and probably March would probably be the beginning of the end or the end of the end. So this does not surprise me. I don't like it, but you know, there's nothing that we really can do about it, except for, like you stated, you know, plan for the future. And something I read the other day, did you know if the government doesn't open up or continues to be shut down by the end of the month, people on food stamps would not be getting their
yes.
cards? Did
yes.
you know? And do you know? And you know what's going to happen? People are going to, you know, maybe riot. I don't know.
Yeah, we could easily see that happen, but right now it's very clear from his earlier press conference today, Trump is not going to back down on his wall, and it's equally clear that Pelosi is not going to back down on no wall, and certainly from Pelosi's point of view, she doesn't really care what happens to the people who are affected by the government shutdown. She just wants what she wants. She's up there thinking she's now the president's equal, and this is her chance now to basically, you know, bump chests with him and say, you know, I'm king, or empress, as the case may be.
Right. Well, I just hope to God that people, you know, don't do anything stupid or end up doing something where it's going to hurt someone or hurt themselves. Because if I was a government worker and I was living check to check, I would be very, very stressful right now.
Oh, yeah. And for this to have happened just before Christmas, I'm sure there was a lot of grinching going on there.
Right. So, well, Michael, you take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the economic news, we're talking about how people are now so pressed by the rising cost of living, they're seeking other places to go, and that's affecting us even here in Hawaii, which you might be confused to think is one of the more desirable places to live. And it certainly is on many of the outer islands, not quite so much here on Oahu. But apparently, Hawaii's population has declined for the second year in a row, and it's because of high taxes, excessive regulations. They're passing all these land use laws that are throttling development. It's a liberally controlled state, and we had in the last year there were 4,000 people who migrated here, but they lost 12,000 residents who moved to the mainland. Our birth rate is exceeding our death rate, but our population is in decline. So, all right, we're going to take another phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing okay.
Mike, two things. One is, how's your New Year, by the way?
So far, so good.
Wait. Okay, that's good. Anyway, as far as the economy goes, as far as these tech companies, I think it would be a blessing in disguise if they all went down and maybe a couple of more companies got started. What's his name? The man is a real dirtbag as far as the head of Apple, as well as the head of Google. You know, that Indian guy, Sandor, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
And Zuckerberg, of course. So I think it would be good, but it might hurt the economy.
Well, I would definitely like to see the social media companies go down, but, you know, let's be very honest. Apple's position in the world is based on a record of cutting-edge technology. And they've made a few goofs, you know, like the Lisa. But they do come out with really good products. And basically, Apple is as much a victim here as anybody else, both of the tariff war and Tim Cook's miscalculation. Because Tim Cook is, unfortunately, because he's got money, he's fine. He still lives in that world where people are going to get the latest and greatest technology just because it's the latest and greatest technology, even if it costs $1,100. And that world doesn't exist anymore for the vast majority of the American and Chinese people. So that was a serious miscalculation. And I'll be very honest, when they first announced the pricing for the iPhone 10, I said, this is a mistake. They have just made a major, major strategic mistake.
But just look what this little creep did to Alex Jones recently. Cut him off, not only after the social media companies cut him off, he actually cut him off from the App Store. So, I mean, I got no use for this guy, and I got no use for Apple. I think another company will be just as good. You always got people who are, you know, with inventive minds and all that, and there's other phones seemingly just as good as the iPhone.
Yes.
So I don't think it would really hurt. And one other thing I just wanted to bring up, you was talking cripples there in Britain. This is why I'd love to take a trip to Russia, okay? And it's not
so would I. I'd love to see the Hermitage.
But yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm afraid to go there now because they might just say, hey, we're just going to pick up an American. You keep wanting to charge our people with the spies, and we'll pick up an American. Next thing I know, I'm in the news. I would, you know, so... You know, I think that's why I wouldn't do it right now. It's not right what's going on. There was no reason to arrest this woman, Butina, and this.
Well, wait a minute. We don't know that. We don't know that. Apparently, there was, in fact, some evidence that she was helping to violate the Iran sanctions. And apparently, this guy, Whelan, was caught with a flash drive. Now, given how quickly the FSB showed up after he got the flash drive, it may be that he walked into a trap of some kind. But you know, there are parts of the world where I wouldn't go, particularly in the Middle East. I'd be comfortable going to Russia. I just wouldn't be a spy for anybody on either side.
I wouldn't either, but I just don't know. I mean, they might just decide to pick up Americans just, you know, because, you know, their people keep getting picked up. Everything I understand about...
Well, wait a minute. Who got picked up? What Russians got picked up?
That lady there, Butina, I think is last name. Nice-looking woman there. She was trying to get information from the NRA to bring the Second Amendment, some kind of a Second Amendment to Russia. And she's been in prison now for months. But
where is she in prison?
Washington, D.C.
Yeah, okay. So we don't really have a case of Russians arresting Americans on the streets right now. And I as far as this Putina is concerned, I think she's definitely on the end of a raw deal there because I think her job was just to go to the NRA. Now, if she did something that can be proven in a court of law, we need to see it. But I agree with you. We don't want to get into a situation where every government is grabbing every other government's citizens, because that could spiral out of control. I don't see Putin's government playing that game. He hasn't kept things as calm as they are by sinking down to that level. And I think this Whelan probably was caught with the goods. And let's be honest, with all these countries getting ready to go to war with each other, yes, they're spying on each other. Okay, that's just a reality. CIA's doing what they do. FSB's doing what they do. I don't know what they call it in North Korea, but they're doing what they do. Everybody's spying on everybody. We probably got hundreds of spies just here on this island.
Well, I don't know. But before I hang up, I just want to say to everybody, you get a chance, tweet Trump. Tell him, get the troops out of Syria, get them out of Afghanistan now, not later. Matter of fact, get them out of Europe. Get them out of all the places in the far corners of the world. And also, stop this nonsense with Russia. They're not our enemies. And get rid of the neocons within your cabinet, or your cabinet and your government, or you're going to be a one-term president. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you want the support of the people who brought you to the dance, you better start support. You better stop this nonsense. Period. Get them out. Get rid of Bolton. Get rid of that Pompeo. They already got rid of Haley, but I think the woman that they're bringing in now, Heather and Howard, is probably just as bad. Get rid of all these people. Then maybe you can get reelected. Right now, you're in your way to defeat. That's pretty much it, Mike. I'll take your answer up there.
All right. Well, there isn't much of an answer there. I mean, it would be great if Trump could find the Elder Wand and wave it and make all of this stuff happen. But it has taken decades for the country to get into this mess, and it's not going to be unwound overnight. For one thing, this nation has been impoverished with the military buildup. And frankly, there's no way to get that money back. It's not like we can take all those rockets back to the defense contractor and say, I want a refund, because I need to have the money to build a school. So they've dead-ended all the wealth of the nation in that military buildup. And again, that was a big part of what brought down the Soviet Union. Bringing all of our troops home too quickly creates a problem. Where do we have them go? What do we have them do? I mean, we've got 700 military bases around the world right now that are just, it's kind of hard to see a way of winding this back quickly that doesn't result in a lot more disruption here. Of course, I would like to see a lot of these soldiers come back from Afghanistan and Syria and get parked down on that southern border. And with that much firepower down there, we wouldn't need a wall. And again, throw some crocodiles in the Rio Grande. It is a huge mess, and unfortunately, I think from the point of view of the war hawks and people inside Washington, D.C., like Pompeo and Bolton, they have invested too much of the nation's wealth in this militarism, in this belligerence, in this push for hegemonic domination. They can't back down, or it all falls apart. If Trump were to come on out tomorrow and say, I'm going to end all the wars, which he was sort of saying the other day, that could lead to an economic crash because of all the money that is invested inside those defense contractors. If it's going to be taken apart, it has to be done slowly, step by step. And somebody's got to put together a real, well thought out, detailed plan on how to do that. Okay, getting into immigration, refugees, and so forth and so on. Story out of hotair.com. Apparently there is a sentiment around Great Britain that the Brexit deal, Theresa May's Brexit deal, is now so damaged that it's not going to be approved in the House of Commons. And, of course, there was a move to remove Theresa May from office. Largely failed because nobody else was really dumb enough to want the job, apparently. Now, there is another analyst, Shankar Singham, the director of the International Trade and Competition Unit for the Institute of Economic Affairs. Boy, there's a mouthful there. And his prediction is that at the last second, Okay, the European Union will agree to an alternative Brexit deal if Theresa May's withdrawal agreement is rejected by the members of Parliament, which now looks to be likely. So we'll see what's going to happen on that. We don't know what the alternative Brexit deal would be. But a lot of the reason people are so angry with Theresa May, she never hid the fact she was a Remainer. And her plan was to basically give the EU everything that they had in practice. So it was a Brexit in name only. Oh, right. Anyway, New Year's, Sadiq Khan over in London was out there and apparently decided he was going to put the flag of the European Union on the London Eye, which is this gigantic Ferris wheel on the Thames. You've probably seen it in some movies already. And that, of course, has angered everybody, along with the fact that people felt that the fireworks show was actually a little too much. So Sadiq Khan's firework display is setting the tone for another year in Great Britain, where the establishment elite will do as they wish and ignore the British people. But again, I've been to the Tower of London. That wood block is still up there. All right, here's an analysis. This is from Sputnik News. It's talking about the border wall. And basically, analysts are saying the wall is symbolic. It can't stop the undocumented migrants. Yeah, it can. As we mentioned before, the walls around the Vatican are very effective. They were there to keep out Muslim invaders. The Berlin Wall was very effective. The wall through Israel, separating from Palestine, is very effective. The walls around the homes Nancy Pelosi lives in are very effective. Walls really do work. Eisenhower succeeded in stopping the illegal immigrants just in their tracks with far less resources than Trump has. It was called Operation Wetback, which would have the liberal PC people going crazy here right now. But there is an easier way, even without the wall. You just stop handing out free stuff to entice illegals to come to this country, and you start enforcing Title VIII. Start jailing Americans who aid and abet the illegals, offer them shelter, transportation, housing, and work, or any kind of support. And this includes all of those governors and mayors who've declared their cities and states sanctuaries, because that's a violation of Title VIII, and it carries some serious jail time. That's where Trump should be going. He should be basically sending out federal law enforcement and start arresting these people. Start throwing these employers who employ illegal immigrants in prison. If the financial incentive to come to the United States illegally is cut off, they won't come here anymore. What are they going to do? Step across the border in order to starve to death? I don't think so. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about immigration, open borders here. And apparently there is a major medical crisis brewing down there at the border because of all the migrants who are arriving at that fence in serious need of, well, medical care, which they want us to pay for. And they're carrying tuberculosis, including drug-resistant tuberculosis, flu. There are pregnant women on the verge of birth. And border authorities are saying it's unlike anything they have ever seen before. And most of those in need of care are children. 28% of the migrants are under the age of 5, having been dragged along on this trip by parents who are hoping to use the children as a shield against speedy deportation from the U.S. So when you talk about all these children who are sick or who are dying, it's not Donald Trump's fault, and it's not the Border Patrol. It is the choice these parents made to endanger their own children. So apparently, according to CBP Commissioner Kevin McLennan, most of those needing help were ill when they arrived at the border, and some appear to have made the decision to come to the border while already ill. Because there's free medical care in the United States. No, there isn't. We have the most expensive medical care on earth. Alrighty, Nanotechnology at Cal State Los Angeles and West Virginia University, respectively, published a scholarly article titled Microaggression and Moral Cultures that detailed the rise of a victimhood culture and how it would be used for social control. So basically, this paper was discussing microaggressions in what might be seen as a negative light, and it is absolutely right. This getting everybody to constantly see themselves as a victim precludes anybody standing up and saying, I'm not going to be a victim anymore for Wall Street, for bad pharmaceuticals, for GMO, for anything anymore. I'm not a victim. And I ignore your microaggression. And if you're offended by that, I don't care. Over in New York City, they're now allowing residents to select a third gender of X on their birth certificates. Now, here is the question I have. The birth certificate is issued when the baby is born. So the baby doesn't get to make this choice. The parents do. And I have to wonder how they might mess up a kid's mind putting an X on there and then letting them grow up with all of this transgender nonsense. All right, there's the music. We got to take a break. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And over in the European Union, they're moving to outlaw the word mankind because it starts with man. Can't have anything that says man. Well, I guess now Trump has his motivation to fund a return to the moon, because we're going to have to go up to that Apollo 11 landing site and pry that plaque off the front of that lower stage, the descent stage, where it says, we came in peace for all. You know what the word is there. Oh, man. It is really getting very, very silly here. Okay. Normally we don't talk a lot about TV shows and movies here, but every once in a while something does. Now, you're probably already familiar with the TV science fiction series Doctor Who. It has been on the air for decades. There was a brief hiatus, I think, about 15, 20 years ago. But it is incredibly popular. It's a golden goose for BBC. And it was all about going on out and traveling through time and having adventures, and it postulated a lot of very interesting ideas. But over the last few years, it's gotten more and more politically correct, ending with the most recent Doctor Who is a woman. And when they made that announcement, Claire, who's a Whovian, came on out and said, well, I don't have a problem with that. And I said, well, I don't have a problem either, but I think the vast majority of the fan base are not going to respond to this. And sure enough, we have this story that came on out basically on how the current season is a disaster. The numbers started out decent about what's going on. It's the feminism, diversity, terrible writing, terrible story decisions, all of which I agree with, because we watched the first few episodes before, we got tired of it as well. And now, of course, as we mentioned the other day, they want to have James Bond be a woman, or at least a transgender. And you remember when they remade Ghostbusters with an all-female cast, what an epic fail that was? It's amazing. All right, let's take a phone call here. James in South Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I was just wondering about immigration and stuff like that. And I was wondering, how long has it been since the United States ever bought any land?
Bought a land?
Bought any land. I mean, Santa Ana offered us the Baja Peninsula, I read, for $10 million years ago.
Which obviously we
if
turned
we
them
had-
down on. I think the last
we
one that
tried.
I recall would be the Louisiana Purchase. Seward's Folly.
Well, I know we tried to buy Greenland at one time, but what I was saying was, if we would offer Mexico some money to buy some land, we could make a territory out of it, and we could put the immigrants there and keep them out of the states. I mean, and we would also have some land. Seemed like it'd be better than it is now.
Well, I think the geography is working against us, because back when we were buying all of this land, much of it was empty and was available. Because of the growing human population, there are very few areas left which are not already under some development. I mean, look at what they're doing to the Brazilian rainforests. And while there are areas of Mexico which are still jungle, if these illegal immigrants were willing to go into a jungle and cut down the trees and build themselves a new village, they would have done it long before now. These are people who are convinced they're on the yellow brick road to the United States, where they're going to get all kinds of free stuff and high-def TV and cars and all kinds of things. And it's a very, very powerful lure for people who have grown up seeing themselves as dependent on some kind of governmental benefactor.
It just seems like an interesting thing. I mean, if we're going to spend, $6 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq, I think we could have we could have probably bought Mexico.
We probably could have, but as I mentioned earlier in the show, all those trillions of dollars we put into the war machine, it's gone. It's dead-ended. There's no way to get it back. And so from the thinking inside Washington, D.C. is, well, we went ahead and bought and paid for it. We might as well go ahead and use it.
Well, I mean, if they're going to spend all the money on the military-industrial complex, looks like to me they could just spend the money and buy a place as opposed to getting the kids killed. Okay, that's okay, Michael. I just wondered.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. And we're going to go with Robert in Northern California. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Well, I don't know if you got the little text there from the network technician, but I was kind of going to back up on you a little bit and discuss this Nancy Pelosi business and the other wild-eyed Democrats that have just kind of started settling into their seats there this year. Yeah, isn't this a peach? Oh, boy, I'm sitting here looking on the internet right now at her wild-eyed happy face while she was taking the gavel, and I'm kind of wondering, Mike, there is something that keeps kind of creeping into my mind here, and that's this. We have people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer up there on one side of an argument, a big argument, and we've got Donald Trump on the other side of the argument. And, I'm not going to say what part of the populace is for this or that, but it seems to me like things have gotten really out of control when these three people can hold so much power over the entire future of our country. It's just getting a little stupid, don't you think?
Well, it was never intended to be that way. Again, the founding fathers of this country set up a system in which power and authority was diffused across the entire country, resting with the state legislatures, the county seats, and the central government was intentionally kept very limited. But over time, the central government has grabbed more and more power to it. And again, get back to Nancy Pelosi. She's now out there telling the New York Times the Constitution says she is now the equal of President Trump, which tells you the arrogance and she's power mad. She's power mad.
Well, look, I'm just as familiar, well, maybe not just as familiar with history as you are, actually, Mike. You probably got me beat on that. But I'm an understanding thinker. I have critical thinking skills, and I have some kind of intelligence attached. But when we've got her making her speech and all of a sudden saying, oh, I think I skipped a couple of pages.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
That was a moment.
Well, no, it just kind of makes me really wonder just the level of I guess I'll reservedly use this word, but I use it occasionally. I think it applies right now. Redonkulous. This is very redonkulous that we have this kind of thing going on in our government right now. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, there are definitely some people in that Congress who are past their sell-by dates, and Pelosi, along with Maxine Waters, seem to be two of them, but they have a political machine behind them which just keeps them firmly in place. And again, it gets back to that issue of massive election fraud, which we saw on full display back in 2016. And again, the midterms, there was no hiding it there as well. So
do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
Well, since you're pretty clearly understanding that entire political machine just as well as I am, what would you suggest, since I really do refer to your advice, what would you suggest that we as a people do about this at this point? Because we don't have a whole lot of time left. If we actually expect to bring this country back without sounding, what do we do? What should we do as a people?
Well, as I am not an advocate
We're going to save this from the brink. How do we do it?
Okay, as I am not an advocate of violence, the only thing we can all do is prepare ourselves and our families to weather the coming storm when the whole system collapses, because it's going to collapse, whether it's led by loss in a war or by the economy coming down. I have been saying for years now that I see the eventual fate of the central federal government of the United States of America as collapsing the way the former Soviet Union did. And then power will revert to the separate states, and they'll probably come back together and form a new American republic where the power again is restored to the states the way it originally was supposed to be. It's obvious to me that Nancy Pelosi has not actually read that Constitution, or she would not have made such an idiotic remark.
She's not the only one. No, it feels like, when I'm looking at the House Representatives, or, well, in some cases the Senate even now, it's like I'm looking at a soap opera of Days of Our Lives. I guess we'd call it Senate and House of Our Lives, right?
I would see that basically what you're looking at is a clique. The socias, like when you were back in high school, and there was always that small group of kids who had money, their parents were wealthy, and they were always covering for each other, and so they could get away with anything that they wanted, and they were infuriating to watch. Well, Congress is basically the same thing grown up, and it's exactly the same way they behave.
Yeah, still infuriating to watch. No,
yes,
I agree with you. Well, meantime, I hate to end a phone call on such a sour note, but I'm looking at the reality of things. Brother, I'm going to wish you a Happy New Year. I hope you and Claire had a wonderful Christmas, and I'll call in another time when I've got something useful to say.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and thanks for the holiday wishes. And Claire and I, we had a very quiet Christmas and a very quiet New Year. We didn't go out except for the Christmas Eve's gala at Claire's church, because I'm her roadie. All right. Art, off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I agree with you. We really need to buckle down and get ready, because it's coming.
Yep.
Anybody can't see it is either dumb, blind, or part of the problem. Anyway, it's interesting. You were talking about the remakes of Ghostbusters as a female, and all of that, and they don't seem to learn. No matter how many flops they have, they don't seem to get the picture. And another one was, and this is when talking about this, I've heard a lot of people talking about this over the past several weeks, about this kind of stuff. And, there's one earlier one that a lot of people don't even think about, and that was when they did a remake of the Fantastic Four, and they made Johnny Storm a black teenage boy.
Yes.
And that really was a major, dealt a serious blow to the Fantastic Four franchise.
Yeah, because Johnny Storm and Sue Storm are supposed to be siblings.
Right,
and anybody who's a fan of the comics would have known that. Right. There's a certain degree of arrogance that's coming on out where the liberals will take something that you have grown up with, whether it's Superman or Batman or Fantastic Four or Doctor Who or whatever, and then they'll go on in and PC it and then throw it at you and say that if you don't accept the way we have re-engineered this, there's something wrong with you. And most people don't respond too well to that.
No, they don't. And, even to the point of like, because there are a lot of really fantastic black superheroes that I grew up with in the 60s and 70s. And Luke Cage was one of them. He was probably my most favorite black superhero because he come from the ghetto, kind of like I did. And he made his way, and he struggled. And I watched this TV series of Luke Cage, and I'm like, this guy here, he's nothing but a hood rat gangsta. I mean, it just completely disrespects the entire image of the original Luke Cage, and the racial stereotypes that are in this are just absolutely pathetic. And I'm a white man who finds this very troubling because it just doesn't work. And I've got black friends here who they're watching it too, and they're telling me, this sucks. This is not right. This is wrong. They don't get it. They can't continue to play this kind of game with people and think it's just going to fly. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right here. I remember when they did the, I never read the comic book, so I don't know one way or the other, but I know when they did the movie of Spawn, they made the central character black. Of course, after he got all burned up and everything, you couldn't tell one way or the other. But again, when you have something like a comic book or a TV show or a movie franchise or something, and it's found its target audience, okay, from a purely business point of view, you don't want to mess with that. But the liberals in Hollywood, they say, oh, here is a successful franchise. We can hijack it and we can turn it into something that pushes the agenda. And then they wonder why it doesn't come out well. Because they don't understand human nature. And they don't want to. They're convinced that human nature is malleable, that it is changeable, and that is their biggest single failing because it is based on an intellectual fraud. Human nature remains human nature. It cannot be changed. It can be controlled, but it cannot be changed.
No, it can't. Just want to throw something out at you, and then I'll let you go. Have you looked at this thing that Elizabeth Warren is doing, this Accountable Capitalism Act? Have you looked at that at all?
No, I haven't yet. Because
this is like, wow, man. I'm not going to say anything. Just look it up and see what you think about that. Because I'd like to get your view on this. It's called the Accountable Capitalism Act.
Well, given Elizabeth, yeah, well, I'll take a look at that. Apparently, she just issued a tweet to Americans who are now without paychecks due to the government shutdown and saying, I'm sending money to refugees instead of you. And she's absolutely right, because the government shutdown hasn't affected the money that's going on down to the refugees or the programs for the illegal immigrants. It's only hurting American citizens who didn't deserve to be hurt. Okay, they just got caught in the crossfire between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi.
All right, Mike, you have a good man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Okay, looking back at the newly installed House of Representatives, apparently along with an impeachment bill against Donald Trump, one of the measures that got introduced was a bill that would bar President Trump from firing Robert Mueller. And this is a non-starter because that violates the separation of powers doctrine. So this needs to get up to the Supreme Court for a ruling. Okay, Facebook has suspended evangelist Franklin Graham, that's Billy Graham's son, for his biblical hate speech. So now Facebook thinks the Bible is hate speech. Over at the University of Massachusetts, there was a student who basically put up a sign in her window saying, "Screw Nazis." Actually, that's not the word she used, but we got to keep it clean for the FCC here. And she actually got told that she needed to take the sign down because it was not inclusive. And she actually got this notification from one of the many diversity whatevers on the campus saying that although the sign is permitted under freedom of speech, you need to discuss the impact on the community the sign has had. There are some in the community who have expressed the sign should be taken down as it has created mixed emotions in the community on how to proceed, issues of inclusion, and the ability to be active members of their community. Well, you know something? When you put up a sign that's provocative, that's the whole point, to stimulate discussion and debate. But apparently that is now verboten on American college campuses. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And up in Oregon, very bizarre circumstance here. There is an organization called the Oregon Board of Examiners for Engineering and Land Surveying. And they tried to find one of their members, Mats Jarlstrom, who is an Oregonian with a degree in engineering and years of experience in the field, for describing himself as an engineer. Now, the context was that apparently, according to this Oregon Board for Examiners, you're not allowed to claim that you're an engineer in a non-professional context. And the context in this case was he tried to challenge a traffic ticket given to his wife by a red light camera in Beaverton. And he approached it as an engineer, questioning the timing of the yellow lights at intersections where the cameras had been installed. And his research put him in the media spotlight. He was on an episode of 60 Minutes and earned him an invitation to present his findings in an annual meeting of the Institute for Transportation Engineers. Then the Oregon State Board of Examiners came on in and tried to find him, but it went to court. And a federal judge has said that, yes, Mats Jarlstrom has a First Amendment right to call himself an engineer anywhere he wants to. Now, these traffic lights have been a problem. And we have one that's close to our home that's really weird because sometimes it'll just sit there forever. And we're talking about the left turn lane. And other times it'll go to green, then immediately go to yellow, and immediately go to red. Maybe one car can get through. So these things aren't very good. Down in Parkland, Florida, the commission investigating the shooting massacre at the school has issued an initial report on Wednesday. Their conclusion was that teachers who were willing to undergo firearms training should be allowed to carry guns. And apparently the 15-member Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission on Wednesday unanimously approved the 446-page report containing their proposal and other recommendations. Now it goes to Governor Rick Scott, Governor-elect Ron DeSantis, and the legislature. Now, the legislature would have to approve the proposal to allow teachers to carry guns. It's opposed by the teachers' union and the PTA. And the report also noted that 30 people were documented to know of the shooting suspect's troubling behavior prior to the rampage that killed 17 people in the school. The report also blamed school security failures and law enforcement blunders from assistant principals and Broward County Sheriff's deputies to social service providers and the FBI, some of whom had been warned Cruz was a potential security threat but failed to take action. Now, obviously, this report is focused on the official story of Nicholas Cruz and doesn't mention the 4 individuals who were caught on camera running out the back of the building. Now, basically, last spring, there was this young student, Brenna Spencer. She's pro-Second Amendment, and she did this graduation picture where she was wearing a Women for Trump t-shirt, but also had a handgun in her waistband. She had the t-shirt partially pulled up so you could see her stomach, and the gun was there. And since then, This graduate of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga has been receiving death threats and calls for her to commit suicide, which apparently went viral. It showed up on nearly 20 million Twitter feeds, and somebody doxed her, posted her address on social media, and she's been the victim of cyber stalking ever since. Now, rather than being scared into silence, Spencer is now working with a nonprofit in Tennessee dedicated to educating students on gun rights and concealed carry. Have you ever noticed it's the anti-gunners who are the first to resort to violence? Over in California, as of January 1st, the gun confiscation laws expanded and added ammunition and certain magazines to the list of items that can be confiscated when firearms are seized. And what they're talking about here is when California issues one of these gun violence restraining orders, otherwise known as a red flag, the police can not only sweep a gun owner's home for the firearms, but for the ammunition and certain accessories as well, and confiscate them. Now, all of this, of course, is very unconstitutional. The gun owner has not committed a crime. He has not had his day in court. He has not had due process. He's not been convicted of anything. This is just the government coming on in and stealing his property. And it's funny how many law-abiding gun owners are being hit with these, but these shooters, these mass shooters, no. 30 people knew about Nicholas Cruz. Nobody went into his house and said, "We want your guns." All right, getting into science and health here. Apparently, drug makers are celebrating 2019 with price increases in the United States on more than 250 prescription drugs, including the world's top-selling medicine, Humira. And, of course, this is directly thumbing their nose at Donald Trump, who wants the pharmaceutical industry to hold their prices level. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the health and science news, we're talking about drug makers raise their prices for this year, even though President Donald Trump was arguing for the prices to be kept level, or at least lower, if not lower, the cost of medications, because this is the world's most expensive pharmaceutical market. Nowhere else on earth will you find these medications at a higher price. And instead, the drug makers basically thumbed their nose at Donald Trump and spiked the prices up, including Humira. Now, about Humira, I have noticed they prescribe that for a lot of different things, all of which seem to be related to overactive immune systems. So is this a case of actually curing a real problem, or of creating a problem and then selling a cure to that problem that you've already created? Because we're hearing more and more that some of these immunological issues are related to vaccines. In fact, there's this article over here in InfoWars talking about how childhood arthritis is now linked to the use of vaccines. Now, most of you probably think of arthritis as an old person's disease, but apparently it is becoming a major problem for children. Little kids coming down with arthritis, and there is a strong correlation where juvenile arthritis skyrockets in countries with mandatory vaccine schedules. Okay, over in Boston, Bristol Myers Squibb has agreed to acquire Calgene Corporation. It's a $74 billion deal that will bring these two drug makers battling for advantage in a crowded market for innovative cancer treatments. And apparently Bristol makes an immunotherapy drug called Opdivo that accounts for roughly a quarter of its sales, but it's trailed a rival medication from Merck & Company, Celgene. Meanwhile, has been looking for a follow-up for its blockbuster blood cancer therapy, Revlimid. So it's all big business. It's all about pushing product here. Article that came on out of Natural Blaze, and it's titled, "It's the Brain-Altering Drugs, Stupid. Addictive Opioids, SSRIs, Antipsychotics, Benzodiazepines, and Suicidality." And the author is talking about how he was just going through the local paper, and he saw an ad for an upcoming conference, if you will, rallying to address opioid addiction. And it was being paid for by an entity called RX Ali Minnesota. Now, RX, obviously the prescription, Abuse Leadership Initiative. And apparently, it's a new alliance of concerned corporate entities that were suddenly interested in the opioid crisis that is affecting all portions of America. The upshot of this article is that as the opioid crisis gets more and more serious, the pharmaceutical corporations are moving to take as much control as they can over various watchdog groups, if not agencies, that might say, yes, opioid addiction is a problem. Because, yeah, opioid addiction, any addiction's a problem. And we've been hearing all these stories in recent weeks about how there are companies that do nothing but write up phony scientific reports, and then they'll bribe some established scientist to submit it to journals under their name. It gets accepted, and then the pharmaceutical company can say, well, our medication has been studied in this journal, and they go to the FDA, and the FDA just rubber stamps it. It's just a machine to get new product. Meanwhile, and this is probably why they're going to start trying to ban it, cannabinoids are found to treat a wide range of skin diseases, including eczema, psoriasis, and dermatitis. But as you know, Big Pharma wants to get rid of that already. Kratom is under attack. Claire was using that for her back pain, for her injury, and it's not banned in Hawaii, but apparently the store where we were getting it, their distributor is now being threatened by the FDA to shut down, even though it's technically not illegal for them to sell it. Now, if you are interested in natural healing, probably one of the things that you've heard about is Manuka honey. It's from down under in Australia. It has got amazing antibacterial properties, which come from the flowers, the Manuka flowers, on which the bees will feed before making the honey. And this stuff is expensive. It's called liquid gold because it's naturally occurring germ-fighting chemical, and it does work very well. I've used it myself. Little warning for you, though. It's turned out that prolonged exposure to heat will basically just destroy its antibacterial properties. So you got to be very careful where you keep that. Down in Africa, the Ebola outbreak in Congo has surpassed 600 cases amid the increasing violence. This outbreak is the second deadliest and second largest in history, topped only by one in West Africa in 2014, which killed 11,000 people. Now, there was a doctor who was working down there who was exposed. He's been evacuated to an isolation ward in Nebraska. He is not yet symptomatic, and we can just hope for the best for him. But the big problem is that a lot of these infected patients are now leaving the treatment centers because they don't trust the doctors. And because of all the violence and turmoil, it's impossible to track where these people are going. And it's known that some of them have now reached cities that are transportation hubs. All right, let's take a phone call. Ken in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
Aloha, Mike. I was watching a TV app on my phone the other day, and I saw a lawyer commercial like they normally do for medications and hernia meshes and all this other stuff. And it was, if you've been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma due to the Roundup or glyphosate, you may be entitled to money damages. And
Yes.
all I could do was sit there and laugh.
Well, I mean, that's coming out of that case in California where there was a huge settlement for that groundskeeper.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I'm not surprised the ambulance chases are... Hello?
I'm here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm not surprised that the ambulance chasers are out there trying to find people who've been exposed, and it's going to be a rich field because if you remember, we had a story yesterday where a wide-ranging study is showing 98% of Americans have glyphosate in their body, and it is a probable carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. And probably they would have said it was a definite carcinogen except for Monsanto's incredible financial and political clout.
Absolutely, and that's where I was going with that. I'm like, finally, they're being, the spotlight has been turned, and now everybody's waking up to it. Even, people that don't want to acknowledge that this is an actual problem.
Well, there's the situation. We're talking huge amounts of money. I mean, just so Bayer completely out of business. But before that happens, I think what we'll see is the U.S. Congress will pass a law like they did for the vaccine industry, saying that Monsanto is indemnified because they provide good things for our society and we have to have them. And they'll set up a glyphosate injury court, which will be there handing out a few pennies to everybody who got hurt.
I will. Financially.
Yes.
Okay.
That's all I had.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Apparently out in Arizona, there is a revolt going on against self-driving cars. And apparently this is in the test market of Chandler, where last year an Arizona pedestrian was killed by a self-driving Uber car. And now more than 20 of these driverless vehicles have been vandalized over the last 2 years, basically slashing the tires, throwing rocks at them, trying to wreck the autonomous cars. If you are watching TV on cable, you've probably seen the ads. They're doing a TV series based on Project Blue Book, and I think they're trying to basically capture the X-Files market there. Project Blue Book was not a project to investigate flying saucers. It was a propaganda stunt to convince people they were up there during a period of top secret aircraft development, so that when you saw something flash over your head, you'd run into the nearby town and say, I saw an alien spaceship, and everybody would ignore you, rather than, hey, I saw this weird-looking aircraft and it landed over there at this airplane. So with that little bit of history out of the side, one of the most famous British UFO sightings was in Suffolk's Rendlesham Forest. It took place in 1980. And if you see any show about UFO sightings, it's usually in there. I've seen it on 2 or 3 shows myself. And it turns out somebody finally went public as to what exactly happened. And it turns out that there was a military exercise where British SAS commandos made a practice of infiltrating the United States Air Force Base. This was a live exercise made to practice, to challenge your American allies. And this was something that people generally do. But instead of receiving a friendly telling off, the SAS team was hauled off into cells, mauled and interrogated at length by U.S. officers who referred to them as unidentified aliens. Now, after their release, the SAS troopers made no complaints, but they cooked up a revenge plan to make the Air Force look silly. And apparently the British SAS created several contraptions using materials at hand, such as remote-controlled kites, helium balloons, colored flares, and launched them into the skies. And that was the origin of that particular UFO sighting. So good for the SAS. That was a creative way of dealing with that. Speaking of being over Great Britain, there is now a warning of a triple polar vortex that will bring heavy, heavy snow in January, which I guess is starting right about now. Down in Brazil, their new president, Jair Bolsonaro, has been sworn in, and he started his presidency vowing to fight Marxist garbage in educational institutions and the climate change hoax. I'm already liking this guy. And apparently, Brazil's hosting of the UN Climate Summit in 2019 has already been canceled. because President Bolsonaro believes the warnings are exaggerated and propaganda from the global left and cultural Marxists. He's absolutely right about that. He's also promised to make the process short with the criminal gangs that plague the country, and there are enough of those. And I hope this guy keeps his Kevlar on there, because a lot of wet work going on. Down in Mexico, in the southern state of Oaxaca, basically there was a brand new mayor, Alejandro Aparicio Santiago, mayor of Tlaxiaco, was simply gunned down in the street. He'd just been sworn in, was going to a meeting at City Hall, when an unknown number of gunmen opened fire on him. He was taken to a hospital but died there later. 4 of the people were wounded in the attack. Okay, story out of Natural News here. As the climate change fear-mongering falls apart, and it is, and this heavy winter will be the last of the global warming, and rebranding as climate change doesn't do anything. Apparently this last year, we did not have any really powerful tornadoes anywhere in the United States. There were 10 tornado deaths. That's a record low. Now, we had some small tornadoes, F1s, F2s, F3s, but none of the F5s. Remember Greenpeace? They were much better known a while back, and they started up as an environmental group, and they were pushing for environmental protection, and they were out there, save the whales, and they were out there in the ocean with a fleet of boats called the Rainbow Warrior boats. And one of the things that Greenpeace campaigned against was this practice of scrapping on the beaching yards of Bangladesh, because it's highly toxic and it pollutes the area. But it turns out that Greenpeace International in Amsterdam, when they decided they needed to get rid of one of their Rainbow Warrior boats, they had it scrapped at a beaching yard in Bangladesh. Little bit of an embarrassment over there. Getting on back to Dieselgate, over 300,000 Volkswagen owners have joined a collective case against Volkswagen, suing the German auto company for damages over the emissions manipulations. Now, if you don't know what this is all about, some years ago it came on out that Volkswagen had altered the software in their cars so that it could tell when it was being tested for emissions levels versus when it was being driven normally. And when it was tested for emissions levels, the engine would configure itself to have low emissions. When it was being driven normally, the engine would reconfigure to get that pep and speed and acceleration that the drivers really liked. And they got caught doing it, and they got fined for it. And now the drivers are very, very upset about that as well. Over in Italy, there is this pedophile who was recently freed from jail, Giuseppe Matarazzo, 45 years old, and he was apparently working as a shepherd. He was shot dead by hitmen who were thought to have been hired by the father of one of the pedophile's victims, who committed suicide because of the attack. And this shepherd was shot 5 times from an SUV after one of the passengers beckoned him over to ask for directions. So police in Italy are still investigating that, but it does look highly suspicious there. Good news for China. They managed to land their lunar explorer Chang'e 4 on the far side of the moon. And some of the videos and pictures from the landing are already coming on out. And it's able to communicate with the Earth because of a relay satellite orbiting one of the Lagrange points on the far side of the moon. And I love the way the corporate media was reporting this. They said China claims they've landed a spacecraft on the other side of the moon. Yeah, they're claiming it. We'll be right back after this commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and talking about space and exploration. As you know, the New Horizons just flew by the most distant object ever explored by humans, and it was called Ultima Thule. It's a Kuiper Belt object. New Horizons flew by it on New Year's, but because of the long distance, it's taking a long time to get the images and data back because they have to use such a low bit rate of speed to make sure the signal is coming on through. Well, the images are coming on out, and it turns out Ultima Thule is actually two objects. It's two spherical objects that rest on each other. It's been called the snowman. And obviously, they're held in each other's gravitational field. But it was a bit of a surprise for everybody who was taking a look and wanting to see what was going to be there. But it is kind of an interesting little object, and it could provide clues on just how the early debris of the solar system coalesced. Was it just crashing and banging into each other all the time, or did it in fact just gently sort of drift together? Because Ultima Thule suggests the latter might be it. Getting on back to the Soyuz spacecraft on the International Space Station and its mystery hole. Basically, the commander of the ISS, Alexander Gerst, is saying that the hole that was made in the Soyuz appears to have been caused by a botched repair job that was done on the ground before the Soyuz was launched up to the space station. So they seem to have solved what that one was all about here. Down in Sydney, apparently they've had a little bit of an incident at the Church of Scientology headquarters. There was a stabbing attack, and apparently one person is dead, another is rather badly wounded. According to police, a 16-year-old suspect is in custody, and the extent of the second victim's wounds were not known. The motive for the attack remains under investigation. So, Lee Remini, time for a new episode of your show. Get on that phone. Episode of your show, rather. And finally getting on in here. As you know, there is a huge problem over at the Catholic Church with high-profile abuse scandals involving priests. Well, as it turns out, there has also been a problem with the nuns as well. And apparently the church succeeded in keeping that under wraps until now, but a lot of the people who were assaulted by these pedophile nuns are now going public. So, boy, the Catholics have got a really, really hard issue to deal with there. Story that came on out from 12160.info. I get emails saying, why are you picking on the Catholics? Why aren't you picking on others? And I say, well, they're not in the news. It turns out that's actually true, because apparently, according to this article, there are Jewish child molester rabbis, but they're kept out of the media. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots and lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody else that you know, and use email, paper mail, face-to-face. Social media is totally compromised. It's a waste of time going on there unless you're into funny kitten videos. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They really need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We really need it. We'll be back tomorrow with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America.